If the number one school can change based on a formula tweak, then does that really mean anything?
Do you think Stanford's
Yeah.
any better this year than they were last year? No, they were great last year and they're still great this year.
So yeah, I think the T14 as a concept is dead. Welcome everyone. This is our first ever Vedarion podcast. I'm really excited to start this because something big happened today. US News rankings came in and there were big changes. So I'm really excited to dive in. And a little bit about myself. My name's Rohela. I have taught LSAT for 6 years. I got a 173, and I also graduated from Northwestern Law School, so have a lot of experience in not just admissions, but also what happens after admissions and what all of this US News rankings really means for what you should be thinking about. And Josh, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, it's great to be here. I'm Josh. I scored a 176 on the LSAT and have been teaching for 10 years. I also went to Northwestern. And yeah, I think it's an important note that on the other side of the application process, the perspective changes pretty radically. So I think our perspective from the other side can be really valuable.
Yeah, let's just dive right in. So, big changes happened when US News rankings came out for law school. The first big one is Yale is no longer number one. It is number two, and Stanford is number one. And Yale is now tied with Chicago. Did not expect this at all. Yale was our main guy when we were, applying for law school was number one. Josh, were you surprised Yale dropping?
Yeah, when we were applying for law school, not only was Yale number one, Yale had always been number one. In the whole history of the rankings, Yale had never not been number one. So for Yale to not be number one, uh, that's newsworthy.
Harvard is still at number six. A couple of other changes. Cornell jumped 5 spots to now number 13. And Berkeley is out of T14s for the first time since the 90s. Insanity, I think. Georgetown and UT Austin are also out of the T Austin, though I think Austin sometimes oscillates between, both of them being in and out. There's a three-way tie at number 13. Cornell, UCLA, and WashU is now up there as well. And outside the T14, a lot of big movement as well. Alabama up 10, Baylor up 9, Pepperdine up 9, and Utah went down 13. Reactions, Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, those are some big swings. Like anytime you're moving 10 points, that's that's really massive. So I think there's a lot more movement than there may have used to be, and we'll talk about why that is. But yeah, big changes. You get a big upswing that looks really, really good, and if you're in the admissions department, you're really not looking for those downswings.
Yeah. I remember when Northwestern first time dropped a little and we were still in the law school, people were like, why am I paying so much if you can't even keep up the ranking? So there was a lot of like indignity because a lot of people pay a lot of money to get into a particular ranking. There's a lot things riding with these rankings. Now, you may think it's about the quality of law schools getting worse or better, but actually it's not the case. It's the classic LSAT flaw example. If you dropped in ranking, therefore you got worse, or if you went up in ranking, you got better. But actually, it's the methodology, the way these rankings are calculated that has changed. So I'll quickly talk about what it used to be. And I want to hear, because we didn't even know what, like, I don't think I ever thought about what went into these rankings when I was applying. They were just the rankings. So, are you curious to hear Josh what went into these magical rankings?
Yeah, because I was like you. When I was applying, I didn't care what the rankings meant. I didn't know. I just it's a very prestige obsessed culture around it. And I think that that's really harmful. And I think we should actually know what these numbers mean and what the movement means.
Yeah. So first, let's start about what it meant, because then I think we can compare to what has significantly changed. So, the old methodology was LSAT factored in as 11.25% of the score, how your rankings were calculated. GPA was 8.75. So together, they were about 20% of how these rankings were calculated. So significant percent. Employment was only 14%. And bar passage was abysmal. It was at 3%. Yeah, Josh, your reactions to the old methodology.
It just it sounds unbelievable. And again, sort of thinking about your position as an applicant, what do you care about? Do you care about the LSAT scores of your peers, or do you care about your bar passage rates and your employment rates? It's a crazy way to have done it.
Yeah. And here's why you should be thinking about bar passage. I think everybody thinks we'll just pass the bar. Yes, but when you get your employment, you know what job you're going to have, I believe the second year, right? Before you even go in third year, you know what job you're going to have. And it's conditioned on you passing the bar. Your ability to pay off loans is you conditional you passing the bar. And so if the law schools, which don't teach to the bar, if they don't prep you well, and you don't have that time in the summer or somehow something, big things happens in life. Like people, have big family emergencies happen or they have to they have to work. Well, what does that mean for your job that's starting in August and September? So I'm really crazy how, employment and bar passage combined was yeah, it total less than GPA and LSAT score. Shall we like talk about the big change?
Yeah, so what happened?
Yeah, what
And
happened?
so a few years ago now, a lot of the top schools sort of rebelled against this. Apparently, they had been sort of talking with U.S. News, saying like, "Hey, we really want to see some changes in this," and U.S. News was not responsive. And so a lot of the schools just began announcing, "Hey, we're out. We're no longer participating in this." So Harvard led the way, and they sort of published a letter, sort of stating their grievances. So we can sort of, take a pretty good hint from that, like exactly what they wanted to see change. So they open by saying pretty strong language. I mean, that they're not mincing words here. They say that they've done it because it's become impossible to reconcile our principles and commitments with the methodology incentives the U.S. news rankings reflect. So they're not holding back here. It's impossible to reconcile. So
For
they
those of
named,
you who could glean in, it's a very FU in a lawyerly terms, right?
yeah,
It's a breakup. It's a PR breakup message. Go for it.
yeah. So they listed three main grievances while stating, these among others. So it was mostly about how debt and financial aid got considered. So the first thing was specifically that there was a metric, and probably to some extent still is, but the way that it worked is the lower the debt burden of your graduates, the better. Now that might sound really good, but here was the problem with it. There's actually two ways to lower your average debt burden for your graduates. One, and the one that we want this to mean is that you give out generous financial aid. But what was the real incentive was to admit people who weren't going to have to take out loans. That's going to really lower your debt burden. But obviously, that's counter to the incentive that is meant to be created. So the second thing, which is again about financial aid, is that the incentive was to provide financial aid to the people with the strongest LSAT and GPAs. Those were such big metrics that to maintain your ranking, you have to really compete fiercely over these students with these numbers. So where does your financial aid go? If you're being strategic about it, do you give it to the people that really need it, or do you give it to the people who are going to bolster your numbers? The third complaint is a little more specific to some of the top schools, I think, but a lot of schools offer these sort of loan assistant programs where for their graduates who are going into public interest, they will assist you in paying for your loans, and that apparently wasn't factoring at all in the rankings. And so Harvard, providing robust help for their public interest graduates, understandably not happy about that not counting for anything. So what do you think about all of that?
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point because, as you pointed out, you could think, oh, this is good. The less debt, the better. But I know from having gone to Northwestern, you're surrounded by rich people who I know people whose parents bought them apartments so they could, go to the city. They refurnished like already high-rise apartments. And
Nice.
it's good to know that there's other ways that what this number can mean. And so I'm kind of glad that Harvard kind of called out US News rankings. Your metric should include more. And of course, I know when I would apply, I would get offers from like the lower T14 pretty immediately, financial aid. They did not know what was my need. They were just going
Hmm.
off my LSAT score. And I think it's really kind of nice that there's a shift.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the more I've looked into it and understood uh, how the rankings works and the incentives that they actually gave law schools, I think it was really overdue to make a change. So what does it look like now? So that's how it was. So
Yeah.
so where are we now? What does it look like?
So the new formula is LSAT is now 5% of the calculation, went from 11.25 to 5, and GPA went from 8.75 to 4%. So it used to be like 20, about 20. Now it's less than 10% combined. And I really like that because higher score is usually is earned by people who can afford tutors and who can afford tutors, who have more money, who have more time, who are not working. So I just feel like there's more in the metrics than just, one shot LSAT score or your GPA. So really exciting. One thing that you would be excited about, Josh, knowing is employment is 33% and bar passage is 25. So 58% is employment and bar passage when before employment was, let's see, 14 and bar was only 3%. So like insane jump, insane change in the way they're calculating the rankings. I love it. Like, because why are you going to law school? Let's be honest. Do you just want a degree? No, you want to be able to afford things in life. You want to be able to work as a lawyer as and get amazing employments. And if it's also like your bar passage affects you, you want law schools to cater to that. Like it's high time. We pay about 80K per year in law school. They should cater to students' needs. Yeah, what are your thoughts, Josh?
Yeah, again, I think you have to look at the incentives that these metrics provide for the law schools. But I mean, before, what incentive do they have to make sure that everybody's passing the bar? I mean, actually, it's pretty limited. Now, it really affects them whether or not their students are passing the bar. And so the incentive is to provide resources to help students do that. I mean, that's a really big thing. And of course, employment. Um, I mean, there are schools with better and worse employment outcomes, and that's something like going to Northwestern. I didn't know exactly what the employment numbers were. I knew they were good, but it's probably something I should have um, known, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, of course, in the top schools, it's going to be good. So if you don't know specifically, you can trust that it's good. But the fact I didn't know, I knew what the LSAT median was. I knew what the GPA median was. I didn't know what the bar passage rate was. I didn't know what the employment rate was.
I think
It's
trust it.
crazy.
We just trusted these US News rankings that higher your ranking, the more likely you are going to have good outcomes, which in
Yeah.
a way, yeah, but I think as you know that you're pretty much guaranteed a job if you go. Like not guaranteed, but it's fine for jobs, but it's nice to see that the US rankings are reflecting more of students' needs than just, what was previously, which is when you're applying, you're not thinking about bar passage or like, you just trust that they're going to set you up for success. Why the hell are you going to law school if not to pass the bar? So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I just trust
Again,
it.
like it was just the ranking. That's all I really looked at. And I didn't know what they actually meant. I didn't know what the numbers were behind it. And I think that's a big mistake that I made. And I think that a big mistake most applicants make. Um, you need to understand where these numbers are coming from and what they actually mean, because the ranking doesn't, it's just a random number.
Yeah.
What matters is what it reflects, and it needs to reflect the right things.
Well, let's dive into what this means for students. Josh, do you want to take a lead? Yeah, what does this mean for students?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would point out is that the US news, they don't actually tell you how prestigious these schools are anyway. So I think in a sense they don't mean much and never have. I mean, whether Harvard is number 6 or number 26, is that going to change most people's perception of how good a school Harvard Law is? No. I think the prestige is a more intrinsic property, and I think uh, the rankings reflect that rather than create that.
I think that's a really important point. The schools, I don't think, have gotten worse or better. That's not what these rankings reflect. They're just a change in methodology. It's, as we talked about. I think the way to approach this is ranking is for schools, not students. And it's just one metric of what you should be focused on when you're applying. And I think when we were applying, the difference between number 5 and number 7 really mattered. And I don't want you to think about it this way anymore because there's a lot of movement. And now that we know more what goes into it, there's a lot more insight into it. I think there are better ways to be more mindful when you're applying. So yeah, I think the T14 as a concept is dead. To think about, T14 or bust anymore. I think there's a more nuanced way to think about it.
I definitely agree. I think people are picking up on this, and I just wish it had been dead from the start. I mean, what's the difference between number 14 and number 15? There's no difference. It doesn't matter. I mean, at number 14, it's such a random number. How did we even come up with that?
Yeah,
Uh, it's crazy that it was ever a thing, and I think the more firmly it dies, the better.
I agree. And also forget 14, 15, 14 and 17. It doesn't matter anymore. Don't chase ranking. I think that's the important part. Don't chase rankings. Ranking is about schools, not students.
I
I
like that.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's just about the methodology. I think in general it's a good guide, but T14 is dead. I don't think it's anymore T14 or bust. That used to be when I was applying. T14 or bust was actually a thing. Now I think I don't even care if it's like T17. They're just one metric of what you should think about when you're applying.
Yeah, I think most of these law schools are providing excellent legal educations and a lot of opportunity. But don't take the like the number associated with the ranking as the indicator because it's not. Look at the employment data, look at the bar passage rate, look at the incomes of graduates. That's the thing that you really care about. And I don't care if you're ranked number 1 or number 100. If that data is positive and strong, then who cares what the number is? I
I
think
think at 100 I would care. At
well, at
100 I
100 you
would
might
care.
you might be getting into more questionable
Yeah,
outcomes.
I definitely want to say I think Josh got overexcited over there, guys. Like 100 we would care, but maybe not. Some of these amazing.
So I mean I
Yeah,
don't know. I don't know. It depends. I mean I
yeah,
think so in my home state of Mississippi, if you want to practice in state, you probably want to go to Ole Miss.
yeah,
The network and everything within the states is really powerful,
yeah.
and I think they're around there. So it depends on where you want to be and what you want to do.
Yeah, I know Baylor is very strong in Dallas, so that makes sense that I think you should look more into where you want to work. Also, I think, as I talked about, a lot of money goes into getting into 170s. And some of these schools that have better employment opportunity in the region you want to work with, you may not need that. So if you're working full time, there's other ways to become a really good lawyer, have a successful career rather than just chase that 170 score. Now it doesn't even mean that much, for in terms of just ranking purposes. So I think you have more opportunity. You always did, but I think this change illuminates that it's not what it was all meant to be. I think a lot of times people focused on chasing a score. Now, does a score matter? Yes. To the law school, it still does. As you look at it, the medians are, still up in 170s for the T14s
And rising.
and rising. And so if you want that, you definitely have to put the time and the effort and into it. I'm not going to say LSAT score doesn't matter. It really does. However, it's not the end all be all. And I think that's what these rankings illuminate. It's always been that way, but it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch of the East. I don't know. I should read more about that, but it's like the shroud lifting. What do you think, Josh? You can maybe have a better analogy to this.
Um, I think it's something that as an applicant, you want to take control over as much as you can because the truth is so much of it is out of your hands. You're going to send off your applications and then you got nothing to do with it. And so I think that LSAT is the one thing you have control over. And I think that's why I put so much emphasis on it. You know, my GPA wasn't quite at medians for a lot of the schools I wanted to be at. So what could I do? You know, I mean, I could do the best I could with my application, but the main thing was LSAT. You know, I can give schools an LSAT above their medians. That's all I had control over, really. So that's why I think it is important, but maybe why it feels even more consequential than the 5% of your application to the rankings that it actually counts for.
Yeah. It was interesting when I was applying. A big push for me to get the really high LSAT score was I couldn't afford law school. I wouldn't get the scholarships I wanted if it was all merit, like if it was mostly merit based, which it was, as we saw. So if they were chasing these rankings and it was merit based, I needed to get up there. Now, I think this changes how I probably would have applied now, would have probably applied sooner. There's more ways to think about what's happening than just like I still have to just get that score or get that T14. So any last thoughts, Josh?
I think I would just add to take the debt seriously.
Yeah.
It's something that I think for a lot of us, it becomes an amount of money that's so large that it's an abstraction. Um, but it's a real number,
Yeah.
and it's something that I think people should weigh more heavily than I think often gets factored in.
Yeah, I agree. I think you should still study for the LSAT, do your best, but know that you have more at control than I think you probably previously believed into having a successful career. And I hope this shed light on how to have that without, buying the myth of T14s. So the rankings are dead, in my opinion. They really are dead. This illuminates that it's not like a T14 is something very, very special. It's just top schools represent something for students that students can take away, such as employment, such as, working hard, like to push yourself to have a higher LSAT score, to have those kinds of peers. I was better off because I had peers who were competitive. Like that is an atmosphere,
Great peers.
great peers, I would say. And so you have, I think a lot more to think about than just chasing like one thing. And I think it's for the good. Also, my last bit, if the number one school can change based on a formula tweak, then does that really mean anything that it was number one or not? Do you know what I mean? If you
Yeah.
change
Do you
the,
think Stanford's
yeah,
any better this year than they were last year? No, they were great last year, and they're still great this year.
same for
Like,
Yale.
that's
Same for
yeah.
Yale. So I would say visit the schools, see what fits you better. I really think that's important. I learned a lot by visiting schools and seeing what would fit me better. I knew that some schools that I loved before I started visiting them, I did not want to study there once I visited them. And some schools changed my entire perspective on them and talking with other students. So go ahead and explore more. You have a lot more power. I think that's what I want to convey than what these rankings truly mean.
Yeah, don't reduce it to the ranking. Look beyond the rankings into what's actually going into those and be real with the things that you value. That the ranking is an abstraction. That there's a lot of real tangible stuff that you should be considering that influences the ranking, but is not the ranking itself.
And maybe create your own rankings depending on your values. So like doing a lot of like what matters to you and deciding based on that where you want to go.
Those are the rankings that really matter,
They
the
really
ones you make
matter.
for yourself.
Well, in closing, again, thank you for joining us please go look at our website, vedarion.com. There are a lot of free resources available. And, again, you shouldn't have to pay for a lot of these resources so you can get a higher LSAT score and go to the law school that you truly want. I hope you took away a lot, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.
Bye.